I'm Cassandra Wilson, though most people know me simply as Cassie. I'm 34, and everything shifted last Tuesday when I glanced at my lottery ticket and realized those 6 perfect numbers meant I had just become $47 million richer. My hands trembled as I tried to process what I was seeing. Once the disbelief faded, an unexpected resolve took hold. I wouldn't breathe a word of this to anyone. My family and money have never mixed well, and past experiences taught me exactly what silence could protect. If you're tuned in right now, I'd love to see where you're watching from. Before I explain the choice that changed my future, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. I share true stories about loyalty, betrayal, and the thin line between the two. Until that life-altering Tuesday, my existence was painfully routine. I was an accountant at a small marketing company in Portland, earning enough to get by, but never enough to feel truly safe. My one-bedroom apartment on the city's edge was simple, nothing special, yet it gave me a sense of independence. Each morning began at 6 with a cup of coffee and a lingering dread of deadlines and bills. The job consumed me, especially during tax season, when 60-hour weeks blurred into each other. As for my family, complicated doesn't even begin to cover it. My parents, Gregory and Diane Wilson, split when I was 14 and both remarried within 2 years. Dad, a high school physics teacher, chose Stephanie, a real estate agent, whose tastes ran far beyond his paycheck. Mom, Diane, married Warren, a wealthy businessman known for his strict control over every dollar. And somewhere in between all that, I had 2 siblings. My younger sister Lisa, now 30, has always held the family's admiration. She graduated from an Ivy League school, married Paul, a successful surgeon, and settled into a picture-perfect suburban life with their 2 beautiful kids. My brother Jason, 36, couldn't be more different. Bright and charismatic as he is, stability has always eluded him. He drifts between jobs and relationships, treating family loans like a revolving door. The routine never changes. A frantic call, heartfelt apology, a promise to repay, followed by silence until the next financial disaster strikes. And the rest of the family wasn't much simpler. Aunt Martha, Mom's younger sister, was the rare exception, genuine, kind, and steadfast. She taught elementary school, scraping by on a modest paycheck, yet somehow managed to be there whenever someone needed her. Her aging Honda rattled like it might fall apart at any moment, and her tiny apartment overflowed with books, plants, and warmth. Complaining simply wasn't in her nature. The same could never be said for Aunt Heather, Dad's older sister. She'd married into wealth and made sure no one forgot it. Holidays with her were a masterclass in condescension. Subtle jabs about my job, my modest apartment, and my lack of a husband. Her son Ryan mirrored her arrogance, but not her fortune, and his growing gambling addiction was the family secret everyone politely ignored. Years of watching generosity turn into regret hardened me. When Jason begged for $5,000 to enter rehab 3 years ago, I drained my small savings to help, only to find out later he'd never even checked in. And when Lisa claimed she was short on wedding expenses, I charged $2,000 to my credit card after her promise to repay me post-honeymoon, a promise that, unsurprisingly, never materialized. 5 years passed, and I was still waiting for Lisa to make good on her promise. When my dad called, asking for help fixing his storm-damaged roof, I wired him what I could spare, only to scroll through social media weeks later and find photos of him and Stephanie lounging on a beach in Cancun. The only person who truly knew how deeply these moments hurt was my closest friend, Charlotte. Charlotte and I met back in college, and unlike so many relationships in my life, ours never wavered. She worked as a nurse, knew the meaning of hard work, and never criticized me for the tangled emotions I carried toward my family. Whenever resentment started to creep in, she gently reminded me that not everyone was out to exploit my kindness. Work offered little relief. My supervisor, Arnold, had a way of presenting my ideas as his own whenever clients were in the room. My coworker, Derek, routinely slipped out early, leaving me to shoulder his unfinished tasks, and somehow he was always the one praised for team effort. Even so, I stayed focused, convincing myself that consistency would eventually lead to recognition. The only small rebellion I allowed myself was a weekly lottery ticket, a harmless tradition that everyone around me mocked. Each Friday, I'd swing by the corner shop, spend $10, and walk out clutching my fragile hope. Mom called it a math tax for dreamers. Jason liked to joke that I should just hand him the cash and save time. Dad turned every mention of it into a mini lecture about probability and poor financial decisions. But for me, those slips of paper weren't about logic. They were about possibility, a glimpse of freedom I couldn't quite let go of. My aspirations were simple: to see more of the world beyond the fog and fir trees of the Pacific Northwest, to maybe pursue a master's in a field that stirred my curiosity, and to finally reach a point where a flat tire or a broken alternator didn't send me spiraling into panic. Reality, however, told a different story. My mid-30s arrived with lingering student loans, stubborn credit card balances, and a monthly juggling act that left no room for error. Groceries, rent, and gas devoured my paycheck. Charlotte and I allowed ourselves the occasional dinner out, but even that required careful planning. I hunted discounts, clipped coupons, memorized sale cycles, and knew exactly where to find the cheapest coffee. My 10-year-old Corolla coughed and groaned whenever the rain hit, yet replacing it was a luxury I couldn't begin to imagine. I had perfected the mask of composure, smiling through conversations while mentally tallying expenses, deciding whether I could afford to accept a dinner invite or if I needed to invent a reason to stay home. That was my reality before everything turned upside down. Life was predictable, occasionally frustrating, sometimes lonely, but steady enough to feel safe. I never imagined that one small slip of paper would rewrite every assumption I held about myself and my family. The irony was that I bought the winning ticket on my 34th birthday. It came at the end of a brutal work week where Arnold, yet again, claimed my cost-saving strategy as his own, earning praise that rightfully belonged to me. Like every Friday, I stopped at Gus's corner market, but this time I deviated slightly from habit. "Happy birthday, Cassie!" Gus called out as I stepped inside. He was a friendly older man who had run that little store for more than 3 decades, always greeting regulars by name. "Thanks, Gus." "The usual, and maybe one extra for good luck," I said, handing him $20 instead of my typical 10. He chuckled, slipping me the tickets. "Birthday splurge, huh?" "Maybe today's your lucky day," he teased with a wink. For once, I decided to pick my own numbers instead of going with random ones. 3 and 16 for my birthday, 12 for my mother's, 21 for my father's, 9 for Aunt Martha's, and 30 for Charlotte's. 6 numbers tied to the people who shaped my life, for better or worse. That evening, I treated myself to Thai takeout, opened the bottle of wine Charlotte had gifted me, and settled in for a quiet celebration. The drawing aired at 8, but I barely paid attention, scrolling through photos of other people's glamorous parties. At 8:30, I finally reached for my phone, expecting the usual disappointment. The first number matched, 3. I smirked. The next, 16th. My pulse quickened. Then came 12, 21, and 9. My breath caught. When the final number, 30, appeared, I froze. For a long moment, I couldn't move. This had to be a mistake. I checked the ticket again and again, then rewound the broadcast just to be sure. Each number appeared exactly as printed on my ticket. My hands trembled so violently the remote slipped to the floor. "No, that can't be," I whispered into the empty room. But the lottery's official site confirmed it. I was the sole winner of $47 million. After taxes, my share would come to roughly $28 million. An amount so vast it felt surreal for someone who, just hours earlier, had celebrated a 10% discount on laundry detergent. Sleep was impossible that night. Instead, I sat in the glow of my laptop, diving deep into stories of lottery winners and what became of them. What I found was unsettling. Articles chronicled shattered families, ruined friendships, and once ordinary people destroyed by sudden wealth. There were tales of relatives and old acquaintances crawling out of the woodwork, pleading for handouts, of winners bankrupt within years, lonelier than ever. One headline even called the lottery the fastest route to losing everything that matters. By dawn, I had made up my mind. I would collect the winnings, but no one would know. Not my parents, not my siblings, not even Charlotte, at least not until I had a plan. I needed time to understand how this fortune would change my life before anyone else tried to shape it for me. That morning, I called in sick for the first time in 3 years and booked a meeting with Philip Montgomery, an attorney who specialized in estate and financial law. His firm occupied a sleek office tower downtown. Sitting in the waiting area, clutching my purse with the winning ticket inside, I felt completely out of place, an ordinary woman holding an extraordinary secret. "Ms. Wilson," he greeted warmly, extending a hand. He was around 50, with neatly trimmed salt and pepper hair and intelligent, reassuring eyes behind designer glasses. "How can I help you today?" I inhaled deeply and slid the ticket onto his polished desk. "I need to claim this," I said quietly, without anyone knowing it's me. His eyebrows lifted for just a second before professionalism took over. "I see," he said calmly. "Well, you've come to the right place." For the next 2 hours, Philip walked me through my options. In our state, winners could remain anonymous by claiming through a trust or a legal entity. He detailed how to create a blind trust, how taxes would be handled, and why assembling a team of financial experts was essential to preserving wealth. The most common mistake, he cautioned, is sharing the news too soon. Once word spreads, there's no undoing it. I nodded, grateful to hear confirmation of what my instincts already told me. "I want to handle this properly," I said. "I don't want this money to destroy my life." Leaving his office with a folder of documents and a detailed checklist, I felt an odd blend of exhilaration and unease. I had more money than I had ever dared to imagine, yet not a soul I could tell. From that day forward, I would live 2 lives, one as the same overworked accountant everyone knew, and another as a woman quietly sitting on millions. During the following 2 weeks, Philip and I set up the trust, claimed the prize, and built investment accounts. Together, we constructed a long-term plan that would ensure financial security for the rest of my life, even if I lived to 100. The money existed now, real, tangible, sitting quietly in accounts with my name on them, yet nothing in my routine reflected that fact. I still trudged to the office every morning, exchanged the usual small talk about bills and deadlines, and drove home in the same weary Corolla. The weight of secrecy began pressing down on me, a strange mixture of power and isolation. I started to think about my family more often. Would they celebrate with me if they knew, or would I simply become a resource to exploit, a never-ending supply of cash in their eyes? The uncertainty gnawed at me until one sleepless night, an idea began to take shape. What if I could uncover their true nature without ever exposing my secret? What if I could quietly test their loyalty before deciding who, if anyone, deserved to share in this fortune? By morning, the plan had solidified. I would stage a financial emergency, not something catastrophic, just serious enough to matter. I'd approach each relative with the same story and the same plea for help. Their responses would tell me everything I needed to know. Before moving forward, I scheduled another appointment with Philip to ensure all financial protections were airtight. Together, we reviewed the arrangements, diversified investments, a charitable trust, and a modest checking account that allowed small, believable withdrawals without drawing suspicion. The rest of the fortune was locked away where no one but me could reach it. "Everything's set, Cassandra," Philip said, handing me a folder. "Your financial future is untouchable. You could walk away from your job today if you wanted to." The notion was tempting, but I shook my head. "If I suddenly quit, everyone would notice," I said. "I'll keep working until I know my next step." That evening, I invited Charlotte over for dinner. We sat out on the tiny balcony, glasses of wine catching the sunset light. I hadn't told anyone about my secret wealth, but the loneliness of it all pushed me to share at least part of my plan with her. "I've been thinking of running a little experiment," I said cautiously. Charlotte tilted her head. "What kind of experiment?" I hesitated, then told her, "I'm going to tell my family I lost my job and need money. I want to see who actually helps, who cares enough to be there when I'm the one in need." Her brows knit in concern. "Cassie, that sounds manipulative. Why would you do something like that?" "Because I'm exhausted from being the dependable one," I replied, avoiding her gaze. "I want to see if any of them would do the same for me." Charlotte sighed, setting her glass down. "But deceiving them? That's not you. Why not just talk to them? Tell them how you feel?" I gave a dry laugh. "You know my family, Charlotte. Honest conversations aren't exactly our specialty. You've seen the way they treat me," I said quietly. Charlotte frowned. "Still, this doesn't sit right. What are you hoping to prove?" "I'm not trying to prove anything," I answered quickly, though even as the words left my mouth, I knew they weren't entirely true. "I just need to know who genuinely cares about me and who only sees me as a bank account." She shook her head slowly. "Cassie, I think you're the one who's going to get hurt here. But I can tell you've already decided she was right. The plan had been forming all day, and by that evening it was fully constructed. I'd settled on a story that sounded plausible but not dramatic enough to raise suspicion. The marketing firm had gone under after losing its biggest clients. I'd tell them I was suddenly unemployed and needed $5,000 to cover rent and medical bills while searching for a new position. The amount was big enough to matter, but not so large that it would seem fabricated, and every person I planned to approach could easily afford it. I made a list: Mom and Warren, Dad and Stephanie, Lisa and her husband Paul, Jason, Aunt Martha, Aunt Heather, and Cousin Ryan. 10 people in total. Each one had leaned on me at some point, for money, for favors, for emotional support. And I had always said yes. Now it was my turn to see who would return the kindness. The next day, Charlotte reluctantly helped me rehearse the story, despite her unease. "You'll need to sound worried, but composed," she cautioned, "and make sure you've got details ready. People will ask questions." I jotted notes as she spoke. "I'll say the CEO was caught embezzling funds and that the company's under investigation. That explains the sudden closure and why I haven't received my final paycheck. And when they ask about your job search, I'll tell them I've been applying nonstop, but accounting roles are hard to come by right now. I'll mention that I've got a few interviews but nothing confirmed yet, and that my savings ran dry after paying for recent medical tests." Every piece of the story was carefully constructed to sound credible and sympathetic, just enough to make them decide whether to help or not. As I reviewed it all, guilt pricked at me. Maybe Charlotte was right. Maybe this was manipulative. But then I remembered every time I'd drained my bank account to rescue someone else. Every promise unfulfilled. Every thank you that turned into silence. The sting of those memories hardened my resolve. This wasn't just about testing loyalty, it was about self-preservation. I even drafted a list of predictions. Mom would likely offer some money, but not the full amount. Dad would turn it into a lecture about budgeting and maybe send a token contribution. Lisa would claim the kids' expenses made it impossible to help. Jason wouldn't even pretend. Warren and Stephanie would dismiss me outright. Aunt Heather would moralize about poor financial planning. And Ryan would probably ask me for money instead. Ryan, I knew, would likely offer empty assurances, promises to help that would dissolve into excuses the moment money was mentioned. The only person I truly believed might come through was Aunt Martha. Though she had the least to give, she had always been the one to show up, no matter how inconvenient or costly it was for her. Still, I tried to temper my expectations. $5,000 was no small sum for a public school teacher living on her own. The plan was finalized. Over the coming week, I'd reach out to each relative one by one, tell the same carefully rehearsed story, and observe their reactions. Only after that would I decide who was worthy of learning about my secret fortune, and who had already shown me what I needed to know. With a strange mix of nervous energy and determination, I picked up my phone and made the first call. I decided to start with my mother. Diane had always painted herself as the selfless matriarch, often reminding us how she'd set aside her own ambitions for the sake of her children. If anyone was likely to lend a hand, it should have been her. My fingers trembled slightly as I dialed her number. She picked up after the third ring, her tone distracted. "Hi, Mom," I began, injecting just enough strain into my voice to sound believably distressed. "It's me, Cassie. Sweetheart, what's wrong? You sound upset." That was my cue. I launched into the story I'd crafted. The sudden company shutdown, the missing final paycheck, the anxiety about unpaid rent and medical bills. I could hear her breathing deepen as I spoke, the concerned mother tone slowly creeping in. "Oh, honey, that's awful," she said at last. "Have you applied for unemployment? And what about your emergency fund?" "I did," I told her, "but unemployment will take weeks, and my savings are gone after paying for some recent medical tests." I deliberately avoided explaining what the tests were for, letting her imagination fill in the rest. Finally, I said softly, "I hate to ask, but I really need some help. About $5,000 just to get through this month. I'll pay you back the moment I can." The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably long. "Oh, Cassie," she sighed at last. "You know, Warren and I just put a down payment on the lake house. Things are tight right now." Her voice hardened slightly, slipping from concern to justification. "Maybe you should talk to your father, or Lisa. Paul's doing well at the hospital." "I'd rather not ask Dad," I said truthfully. "And Lisa's got the kids and all their private school costs." "Well," she replied after a pause, "let me see what Warren says, but I can't make any promises. You know how particular he is about, well, you know." I did know. Warren had made it clear since day one that his finances didn't extend to me. His money was for my mother, and the children they never ended up having. "Okay, Mom," I said quietly. "Just let me know soon. The rent's due next week." "I will, honey, and I'm so sorry about your job," Mom said softly. "But these things have a way of working out for the best. Maybe it's time to consider a more stable career." After ending the call, I jotted down her reaction in the journal I'd started for this experiment. She'd shown sympathy, yes, but her first instinct had been to redirect the responsibility elsewhere. She hadn't said no outright, but I could already imagine how her discussion with Warren would end. A polite apology, an excuse, and no money sent. The following day, I met my father, Gregory, for coffee. I picked a busy cafe downtown, hoping a public setting might temper his response. As soon as I sat down, he gave me a once-over. "You look tired," he said matter-of-factly. I smiled weakly and launched into my prepared story. He listened with the expression of a man grading a paper, detached, analytical, occasionally nodding, but never showing emotion. When I finally mentioned the $5,000, he leaned back, crossed his arms, and sighed. "Cassandra," he began in his familiar lecture tone, "I've always told you to be financially responsible. This is exactly why I said you should keep 6 months of expenses saved. What happened to that plan?" "Life happened, Dad," I answered, careful to sound weary but not defensive. "Medical bills, car repairs, you know how it is. Not everyone can save that much." He shook his head slowly. "And now you expect others to bail you out. Have you looked at your spending habits? Do you really need to live in that area? What about your streaming subscriptions?" The conversation dragged on for 20 long minutes as he dissected my supposed financial mismanagement, lecturing me about budgeting, employment trends, and the virtue of sacrifice. He never once mentioned actually helping. "I'd love to assist you, Cassie," he finally said, patting my hand in what was meant to be a comforting gesture. "But Stephanie and I are preparing for retirement. Touching those funds would be irresponsible. You'll thank me later. This experience will build character. Sometimes hitting bottom teaches us what truly matters." I smiled faintly, blinking back tears that weren't entirely part of the act. Even expecting this kind of response didn't soften the sting of being dismissed so easily. Next on my list was Lisa. I drove out to her pristine suburban home that Saturday afternoon. Paul was away golfing, which meant we could talk in private. "Cassie, what a surprise," she said brightly as she opened the door. "The kids are at swim lessons. Come in." The house looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine. Polished floors, designer furniture, family portraits perfectly arranged on every wall. We sat in her gleaming kitchen, sipping lattes made with the kind of espresso machine that probably cost more than my car. When I told her about losing my job, her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, my God, that's terrible," she gasped, reaching across the marble island to squeeze my hand with perfectly manicured sympathy. "I can't believe they'd just shut down like that." "Poor you," Lisa said, her tone soft and eyes wide with concern. For a fleeting moment, I thought maybe she would surprise me. Maybe she'd step up when it mattered. Then I mentioned the $5,000. Her expression flickered, sympathy fading into polite discomfort. "Oh, well, this really isn't the best time," she began, glancing away. "We just bought the new Audi last month, and the kids' tuition payments hit us hard. Plus, we're remodeling the master bath." She gave a small, uneasy laugh. "Paul handles most of our finances, and he's very strict about what we spend." "I understand," I said softly. "I wouldn't ask if it weren't urgent." I know," she said quickly, her voice a touch too bright. "Let me talk to Paul and see what we can do. Maybe we can help with a smaller amount. Or, hey, maybe you could stay here for a while? The guest room's full of boxes right now, but we could clear it out." I smiled, pretending to consider it. "That's kind of you, but I need to stay in the city for interviews." She nodded, promising to call once she spoke to Paul, though her averted gaze told me exactly how that conversation would go. Jason's response was worse. I texted him the same story, adding enough detail to sound genuine. His reply came within minutes. "That sucks, sis. Really tight right now myself. We'll call you later." He never did. My follow-ups went ignored, and when I tried calling, his phone went straight to voicemail. The silence stung more than I expected, especially from the brother who had borrowed thousands from me over the years, always pledging to pay me back once things turned around. When I called Stephanie, my father's wife, she didn't bother disguising her indifference. "Cassandra, I know this must be stressful," she said briskly, "but Warren and I simply aren't in a position to assist right now. Maybe this is a chance for you to reevaluate your finances. Have you thought about finding a roommate or moving to a cheaper area?" I reminded her that I'd helped fund repairs for their vacation cabin the previous year. Her tone sharpened instantly. "That was different. It's a shared family property, and you've benefited from it too." The fact that I'd only been invited there once, for a single afternoon, was apparently irrelevant. Warren's response made hers sound gentle by comparison. When I called, he didn't waste time on small talk. "You're not my daughter," he said flatly. "I've supported your mother for years, but your financial troubles aren't my responsibility. Maybe you should have chosen a career that actually pays." Then he hung up. Ryan, at least, pretended to care. He texted back almost immediately, full of sympathy. "Absolutely, Cass. I'll help. Let's grab lunch tomorrow. I'll bring a check." Relief flickered for a moment, but the next day he texted an hour before we were supposed to meet. "Something came up. Let's reschedule soon." Of course, he never did. He never followed up, and after a few unanswered messages, Ryan simply stopped replying altogether. Aunt Heather's reaction was the least shocking of all, though it still managed to sting. "Well, Cassandra," she said briskly, "I always knew that company of yours was on shaky ground. I told your father, years ago, you should have taken that position at the bank, but no one ever listens to me." What followed was a long monologue about how various relatives had faced financial hardship and pulled themselves up, without ever resorting to handouts. By that evening, Lisa texted to let me know Aunt Heather was already sharing my supposed financial recklessness with half the family. After a week filled with rejections, excuses, and unreturned calls, I was drained. The experiment had confirmed everything I feared. 7 people who had leaned on me in their worst moments couldn't offer even modest support when the tables turned. knowing it intellectually didn't make the truth any easier to swallow. Then my phone rang. It was Aunt Martha. "Cassie, honey, your mom told me about the job," she said, her voice warm and full of concern. "Are you holding up okay?" I hadn't even contacted her yet. She'd heard through the grapevine and reached out first. That alone said more than any promise of money ever could. "I'm hanging in there," I said, unable to disguise the emotion in my voice. "Good. Listen, let's have lunch tomorrow. My treat," she said firmly. The next day we met at a cozy little diner near her apartment. Martha looked just as she always did. Silver-streaked hair tied back in a loose ponytail, jeans and a cardigan with mismatched buttons, a kind smile that reached her eyes. She hugged me tightly before we sat down. "I'm so sorry about what happened, sweetheart. That company didn't deserve you anyway." As we ate, she listened intently, asking practical questions about my job search and offering to connect me with some of her retired colleagues who might know of openings. When our plates were cleared, she reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, sliding it toward me. "I want you to have this," she said gently. "It's $3,000. I know it's not everything you need, but it'll help with rent." I stared at it, speechless. "Martha, I can't accept this. It's too much." "Nonsense," she said, waving away my protest. "Family helps family. And if you need somewhere to stay to save on rent, my sofa folds out into a bed. It's not fancy, but you're welcome as long as you need." Tears blurred my vision, not the controlled, deliberate kind I'd used during the other conversations, but the raw, unexpected kind that came from being seen. "Thank you," I whispered. "Don't worry about paying me back right away," she said, squeezing my hand. "Just get back on your feet, and this time find work that makes you happy." "Life's too short to stay somewhere that doesn't value you," Martha said as we left the diner. She hugged me again before I got into my car. "You're going to be fine, Cassie. You're smart, capable. This is just a detour." Driving home, I held the envelope she'd given me like it was something sacred. $3,000, money I knew she couldn't easily spare. The difference between her kindness and everyone else's indifference hit me hard. The only person who had stepped up was the one who had the least to give. Later that night, I couldn't shake the thought, so I did a bit of digging. What I found made my stomach twist. That $3,000 represented almost all of Martha's savings. She'd been quietly managing complications from type 2 diabetes, and her medication costs had recently gone up. She'd even taken on extra tutoring sessions after school to cover the difference. The realization left me breathless. Martha, the one person who struggled most, had offered me nearly everything she had, freely and without expectation. Meanwhile, my mother had spent $8,000 retiling her bathroom just a month earlier and couldn't spare $5 for her daughter. The next day, I invited Martha to dinner at my apartment. When she arrived, she sank into my old couch, smiling softly, though I could see the weariness in her eyes, lines etched a little deeper than before. I brought her a cup of tea and sat down beside her. "Martha, there's something I need to tell you," I began, my hands trembling slightly. "I haven't been completely honest with you." She looked at me with gentle curiosity, not alarm. "What is it, sweetheart?" "I didn't lose my job," I confessed in a rush. "The company's fine." I made up the story to see who in the family would help if I really needed it. Martha was silent for a few seconds, just studying me. Then she nodded slowly. "I see. Are you angry with me?" I asked quickly, dread tightening my throat. Losing her trust would be worse than any rejection I'd faced that week. Her brow furrowed slightly, but her tone stayed calm. "No, not angry." "Maybe a little sad," she admitted. "Sad that you felt you had to test people to know where you stand." She took a sip of her tea, thoughtful. "But I can't say I don't understand. Our family hasn't always treated you kindly. You were the only one who offered to help," I said quietly. "Everyone else either ignored me or found excuses." Martha sighed, the sound full of weary wisdom. People reveal who they are when generosity costs them something, she said softly. I learned that lesson a long time ago. What do you mean? I asked. She set her teacup down, folding her hands neatly in her lap. My ex-husband Robert, she said. Did I ever tell you the real reason we divorced? I shook my head. The family story had always been vague, just that they'd grown apart over time. I came into a small inheritance when my grandmother passed, Martha said softly. About $50,000. Not a fortune, but for us back then, it felt like a miracle. She gave a wistful smile. Robert immediately started talking about all the things he could do with it, investing in his friend's ventures, starting some big project. I wanted to save it, maybe put it toward a house someday. We argued about it for months. What happened? I asked quietly. One afternoon I found out he'd forged my signature and drained most of the account, she said, her expression calm but tired. He put the money into a restaurant his friend was opening. It failed within a year. When I confronted him, do you know what he said? She paused, eyes distant. He told me it was our money, not mine, and that he had just as much right to it, as though the inheritance being in my name meant nothing. I stared at her, stunned. I never knew. Everyone always said you just grew apart. Martha gave a small, humorless laugh. That version was easier for the family to swallow. Then she reached across and took my hand. The truth is, I learned something hard back then. Some people see you not as a person, but as an opportunity. It's a painful lesson. I'm so sorry, I said, squeezing her hand gently. It was a long time ago, she said with a small shrug, but it taught me something about money and about people. Money doesn't just show who others are, Cassie. It shows us who we are. It reflects our choices, our priorities, our compassion. It's a mirror, if you're brave enough to look. Her words struck something deep inside me, and before I could stop myself, the truth spilled out. Martha, there's something else I need to tell you. Something big, I drew in a shaky breath. I won the lottery 3 weeks ago. $47 million. Her eyes widened, but she didn't gasp or flinch. She simply waited for me to go on. I haven't told anyone, I said. Not Mom, not Dad, not Lisa or Jason, not even Charlotte. You're the first to know. Oh, Cassie, she whispered. That's incredible. That changes everything. I know, I said quietly. And that's why I did the test. I had to know who would be there for me, not for what I could give them, but for who I am. Martha nodded slowly. I understand, she said, but what happens now? That's what I'm still trying to figure out, I admitted. The money's secure. I've got a good attorney, a trust, investments. But when it comes to my family, I just don't know. She took a moment before replying. You don't owe them anything, Cassie. Not one of them, not even me. But I want to help you, I said, my voice rising slightly. Your medical bills, your apartment, anything you need. Her smile was soft and kind. Sweetheart, I don't need a thing. My life may be small, but it's mine. My apartment's filled with books and plants and memories. I'm content. My car runs most days, Martha said with a wry little smile. I have my students, my books, and now this lovely secret with my favorite niece. She gave my hand a gentle pat. Just knowing you're safe and happy, that's more than enough for me. Her selflessness broke something open in me. Here was a woman who had given me almost everything she had when she believed I was desperate, and now, knowing I was worth millions, wanted nothing at all in return. We talked late into the evening, and the more we spoke, the more glaring the contrast became between her quiet grace and the rest of my family's selfishness. While I'd been carrying out my little test, word of my financial crisis had rippled through the family, not as concern, but as gossip. My phone buzzed with messages that night. The first was from my mother. Heard you asked Lisa for money too. You should have told me you were going around asking everyone. Feels like you're trying to pit us against each other. Then one from my father. Stephanie says you've been calling the whole family for handouts. This is exactly the kind of irresponsible behavior I've been warning you about. Each message confirmed what I already knew. Instead of compassion, they offered judgment. Instead of unity, whispered